The Greek historian Herodotus wrote that Greece had a faithful friend in poverty. A strange thing to say about a land that was considered glorious, proud, undefeatable, elegant and cultured, but an accurate one. Many Greeks earned their livelihood through trade, others with fine crafts, but the barren and infertile Greek soil actually produced very little. From the 8th century BC, the Greeks started emigrating mostly westwards towards Italy and Sicily, a fertile land in the middle of Mediterranean sea lanes and an ideal position for trading. While excavating on Sicily, archaeologists have found numerous buildings in the interior of the countryside and have concluded that around the middle of the 4th century BC, many cities expanded into new districts and suburbs, often far from the coast. What was the cause of this population explosion and shift in locations? By consulting ancient sources, particularly Plutarch's writings, scholars discovered that in 339 BC, the Greek colonies on Sicily defeated the Phoenician colonies in the west in the Battle of Himera. Laying the foundations of their supremacy on the island and calling upon their homeland for strong men to colonize the island. One of the issues long debated among archaeologists is whether the first settlers, the pioneers who came to Sicily, were peaceful explorers who lived in harmony with the local inhabitants, the Sicanians, or did they forcefully take control of the best land on the island? According to the accounts of ancient historians, the Greeks were a belligerent people, unlike the Phoenicians, who also settled on the island, although only for trade purposes. Greek settlers were described as being intent on owning arable land. While the Phoenicians built emporiums along the coast and were not interested in the interior, the Greeks tended to expand and take military control over vast areas. Ortygia is a small island next to Sicily, and the first settlement of what would become the largest Sicilian colony of ancient times, Syracuse. Excavations under the present-day cathedral there, which incorporated the Greek temple of Athena, led to the discovery of an ancient indigenous colony, supplanted in the 8th century BC by a Greek colony. Archaeologists were able to pinpoint the date after studying the type of pottery they found. Studies revealed that Greek settlers had driven out the native Sicanian peoples, conquered the city of Syracuse, and expanded beyond Ortygia into the mainland. The building boom the Greeks initiated may be found to this day in the quarries that were later used to keep prisoners of war. But people weren't constantly at war on Sicily. There were long, peaceful periods during which Greek settlers exchanged products and compared their artwork with Phoenician settlers and the Sicanians, keeping the island humming with a prolific cultural exchange. In the 4th century BC, Syracuse was an enormous city, with mighty fortresses and numerous monuments elegantly decorated. Among the most famous pieces is a Gorgon mask and the Venus Landolina. Across the canal on the mainland was the second part of the city, a city that had become the largest and most important in Sicily. In what is presumed to be the more recent quarters of the city, archaeologists discovered a theatre. Strange inscriptions engraved in stone appeared at various points. All the graffiti had something in common: names of gods and famous kings. But what was the relationship between them? Systematic excavation of the theatre and reliefs revealed a strange symmetry between the points where the inscriptions were found. The names had been engraved to distinguish the theatre's various sections and seating arrangements. It was here that the premiere of one of the most representative dramas of Greek culture, The Persians by Aeschylus, was held. A play about the great victory of the Greek city-states, united for once, over the militarily strong Persians, whom the Greeks defined as barbaric and lacking culture. The premiere at Syracuse meant that Sicily had become, over time, an integral part of Greece. After all, Aeschylus, like Archimedes, was a Siciliot, a Sicilian Greek, and spent most of his life at this theatre. Above all, the theatre symbolized Greek culture and its presence on Sicily. The Phoenicians, on the other hand, were primarily devoted to trade and spent little time on literature. And the Romans, who arrived later, preferred the oval-shaped amphitheatre where they could watch gladiators in action. The world's highest concentration of ancient Greek theatres is not in Greece at all, but on Sicily, where culture was associated with wealth. This one, at Tindari, opens towards the sky, giving a sense of how the Greeks attempted to create dramatic visual impact and intensify the pathos of their tragedies. One of the most spectacular theatres on Sicily is the one at Taormina, dug into a promontory overhanging the sea. This one at Catania, at the foot of Mount Etna, is part of the city landscape. At the other end of the island is Agrigento, a valley studded with temples, many of which are still standing. The temple of Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri, was rebuilt using original materials. What is the reason behind such a concentration of majestic public works? The most important temples, the Temple of Concordia and the imposing Temple of Zeus Olympus, decorated with telamonies, huge figures used as pillars over 23 feet high, were erected only a few years apart, around the middle of the 5th century BC. Who could have handled such a huge workload in such a short time? And where did all the money come from? Scholars look to the writings of Greek historians for the answer. Herodotus and Diodorus both spoke of a tyrant from Agrigento called Theron, who a few years earlier had won a devastating war against the Phoenicians. As well as riches, the victory brought him slaves, a vast number of them. So many, in fact, that some of the inhabitants of Agrigento owned more than 500. Could they have been the workforce that built the Valley of the Temples? This is what the Temple of Concordia would have looked like with its original colors in the 4th century BC. It was once thought, incorrectly, that all Greek temples were white. The Temple of Concordia is a typical temple of the classical period, with 6 columns on the short sides and 13 on the long sides, surmounted by clean-shaped Doric capitals. Its base, made up of 4 steps, was designed to overcome the rises and drops in the rocky terrain. The poet Pindar said that Agrigento was the most beautiful city of mortals. In a tranquil setting not far away at Selinunte, also known as Selinus, are 3 temples erected in a row on level ground. Ancient and majestic, they're identified simply by letters of the alphabet, E, F, and G. But very little is known about them. The ruins of the most imposing one, Temple G, have baffled some archaeologists. The columns, ruined at the base, are partly smooth and partly fluted. Although the different styles were both used by the Greeks, in no temple were both styles used together. What was the reason for this mixture? Certainly not for aesthetics, since classical Greek art was based on stylistic consistency. Archaeologists then compared the design with contemporary building techniques. We know that columns were assembled in blocks, the so-called drums, one on top of the other, until they reached the capital, and only then fluted. Therefore, the column of Temple G may have been unfinished. But why was it never finished? Scholars think they've found the answer in some diplomatic treaties between the Greeks and Phoenicians. Although Selinunte remained a Greek city, it came under Phoenician influence around 409 BC, a watershed in its history. In order to conquer Selinunte, the Phoenicians attacked with overwhelming force and destroyed many of its monuments. Most likely, Temple G, still needing its final touches, was destroyed at that time. Standing in their full glory, the temples would have been a grand sight. Temple G was perfectly aligned with Temple E. The sacred complex that included a 3rd temple, called Temple F, was erected on the city's eastern hill. The largest of the 3 was Temple G, which measured 113 by 54 meters. In the 6th century BC, it was one of the most regal of the Greek world, soaring to almost 30 meters in height. Its size has been gauged by its 17-meter-high columns. Their abacus, the square part of the capital that rests on the architrave, extended for 19 square meters. The majestic Temple G demonstrates the importance of the city of Selinunte, founded as a colony of another city, Megara Hyblia. Selinunte developed more, however, because of its 2 seaports. The wealth of the city encouraged a certain degree of sophistication in its architecture. The space inside, the nave, the heart of the temple, has no roof covering. Did this temple have some function other than religious? Its grand size and importance seem to suggest so. After studying an inscription found there, archaeologists concluded that it may have contained the treasury of Selinunte, like the main temples of other Sicilian cities. The central nave was arranged on 2 levels. The upper level, accessed by 2 side staircases, was not open to worshippers. Besides aesthetics, it had a more practical function. It was used for the routine upkeep of this high structure, particularly the colossal wooden trusses that supported the roof. The temple's cellar housed a statue of the god, probably Apollo or perhaps Zeus. Among the ruins, archaeologists discovered only a headless bust, so the discussion remains open. The Acropolis, the highest part of the city, was the site of Temple C. The new Phoenician quarters were built in the vicinity of the Acropolis after Selinunte had come under their control. But the Greeks had decided to stay. The Elimi, an indigenous population from nearby Segesta, later frequented the city. Although they often fought with the inhabitants of Selinunte, at times they also collaborated with them. The Greek historian Thucydides recalled the signing of a treaty between the 2 peoples, allowing them to intermarry, giving birth to the mixture of cultures that made the island great. With its trade, riches and ancient buildings, Sicily was the heart of Magna Graecia, bridging continents and civilizations, a fertile and colourful land, where long after Homer's time, the Greeks still believed the cattle of the sun gods roamed the hills. The jewel of the exotic, ancient Mediterranean.